In this short screencast, we're going to show you how easy it is to build URL-driven JavaScript applications using Ember. And in particular, we're going to build a blog reading application that pulls a JSON feed and renders it to the user and has a couple different pages. So you can see how you can build these very sophisticated, complicated UIs and still keep the URL up to date that tracks it. So pretty powerful stuff. Now, I'm starting off with the starter kit, the Ember starter kit that you can download from Ember.js.com. I've only made a few small tweaks here to get us started. The first is that I'm including Twitter Bootstrap CSS, so none of the JavaScript, just the CSS. And I'm also including two additional JavaScript libraries, Showdown, which is a Markdown parser formatter, and Moment.js, which is a time formatting library. And you'll see later on in this screencast how those come into play. And then if we switch over to our JavaScript, you'll see that the only code that I'm starting out with is I've created an Ember application called app, and that's it. So let's switch over to Chrome now and take a look. I'm going to refresh the page, and you'll see nothing because we're starting out with a completely blank slate. Nothing has been defined, no HTML yet. So just to get us started to see how this works, I'm going to switch back to our HTML file, and I'm going to paste in some static content that I've prepared ahead of time. Now this is HTML it's marked up to be designed to work with Twitter Bootstrap. And the important thing to call out here is that this is just plain standard HTML, and I've wrapped it in this script tag. And I've wrapped it, it's got an attribute type equals text / x handlebars. That tells your browser this isn't JavaScript, this is handlebars that Ember will be in charge of parsing and figuring out what to do with. Now when I switch back to my browser and refresh the page, you'll see that that static HTML has automatically been displayed. I didn't write any JavaScript yet. I don't need to write anything. All I do is create this handlebars template, and Ember's smart enough to know that it should render it to the page. Now you can see, looking at our application, that we've defined two different pages that we want to possibly display to the user. The first is a post, which will just list all of the blog posts, and the second thing will be this about page. So when you're adding if you want to display a template in Ember, the first thing that you need to do is define a route which is basically the URL associated with that template. So let's go do that right now. I'm going to switch to my app.js, and the first thing I'm going to do is just create a router and define my routes. Now this takes a function, and we have this helper to say this.resource to define a resource. In this case, this will be the about resource. And now if we go to our index.html, we're going to create a new template. So the template that we had before is called our application template. This is the template that always gets rendered. And now we're going to create another template called about. Now, Ember's pretty smart about this stuff. You don't have to do a lot of configuration. You don't have to write a lot of code to tell it what you want to do. It can figure out that if you have a route named about and a template named about, that when you visit the about route, you probably want to show that template. So I filled this in. Again, this is just some static HTML, some placeholder that I filled in. And now, when I go refresh the page, nothing's going to happen because I haven't told it that I want to go to the about page. So what we can do here is just type in /about, and it will, still not working. What's going on? Well, we want to display this about page, but we haven't told Ember where we want to display it. We have this application template that always gets displayed, but we haven't said where inside that template this new about template should be rendered. Now that's really easy to do. There's a concept in Ember called an outlet. An outlet is just a placeholder that gets filled in with whatever template you want to display. So in this case, we want to display this about template right below the nav bar. So we just put the outlet right here. And now when we refresh the page, you can see that it's rendering the about template into that outlet. Now we obviously don't want our users to have to type in /about all the time. It's pretty annoying. What we'd like is if they click the about link, that it would take them there. But right now it's just taking them to a blank page. What we want to do here is replace this kind of dummy link with the handlebars link to helper. And we're going to say when you click the about link, we want to link to the about route. And we want to close this tag here. And now when we refresh, you can see when we click on it, two things happen actually. The first is that it's rendering the template as we expect, and it's going and updating the URL automatically. And it's adding this active class. You can see we've added a bold style to the active class, so it's adding this active class here to the link. And when we switch away, you'll see that that active class is removed and the about tag is no longer blank. When we click it again, you can see the URL is updating and it's rendering the template. Okay, now we've got our static content, but obviously this isn't very interesting. There's no reason for any of this to be rendered on the client. This could all be very easily done just on the server. Well, how about this list of posts? We'd really like us to show a list of all of the posts that our blog reader knows about and show them on the left-hand side here. Let's switch over to our application. The first step to do this is we really want to define a model. But actually, the first step is we're using Ember data, so we have to define a store. And this is just an object that's going to store and find all of the records or models that we ask for in the course of our application. So two things we need to provide here. The first is just an API revision number. This helps us be notified if there are breaking API changes. And second, we need to tell the store where it should try to look for those records that we ask for. And just to get started, we're going to use something called the fixture adapter. Now, the fixture adapter allows us to basically specify all of our models in JavaScript, and then later on in the development cycle, we can switch off to a live server. So now that we've created the store, let's define the model that we're going to be using. In this case, a blog post. Now here I just say app.post equals ds.model.extend, and now I want to define all of the different attributes this model might have. So in this app, we're going to have a title, which is a string. We're going to have an author, which is also a string. We're going to have kind of intro text, which is like the blog post, the portion that gets printed above the fold, and then the extended blog post, which is basically everything that comes afterwards. And then lastly, we have this date that it was published. And let's call this. This is ds.adder date. Okay, so we've defined our model, but obviously the model is no good without a little bit of data to help us get started and kind of see how this application is working out. So I'm actually going to copy and paste in some fixture data here. The format's pretty simple. You just take the model name and you add this fixtures at the end, and you provide an array of JavaScript object. Okay, so now we've defined our fixture data, but that's not very useful. How do we actually display that to the user? What I like to do when I'm building my apps is start with a little bit of static HTML, and then once I verify that it's working and it looks correct, then go make it dynamic. So the first thing we need to do is define our post resource. We'll say this.resource posts. And again, all this is doing is saying that when the user visits /posts in their browser, we want to render the posts template. So let's go build that template right now. I'll switch back to my HTML. And again, I'm just going to paste in a script tag here. In this case, I want to define the post template, so I give the script tag an ID of posts. And you can see here I've just got a table with some static content. And then I'm just going to change this link up here to use the link to helper like we did before. So say link to posts. I'll just have Handlebars make the link for us. Okay, now if I switch back to my application and click on posts, I should see this nice static content appear over here. Now that we know it's working, let's make it a little bit more dynamic. So to do that, I'm going to switch back here to my text editor, and what we would like to do is for each of the blog posts that our application knows about, we'd like to repeat this trtd. So what we're going to do is wrap it in the handlebars each helper. So we're going to say pound each model. Basically, we want to loop through all of the models associated with this template, and for each one, print this tr. And instead of printing the static title, we're going to replace it with this handlebars expression title. It's going to pull that from the model, and same with the author. Now, if we go to the browser and refresh, nothing's showing up. How come there's nothing here? Well, we haven't yet told Ember what model or collection of models we'd like to back this template with. That's really easy to do. Let me just switch to my application JSON here. And basically what we want to do is say, when you visit the posts route, we'd like to specify which model is associated with it. Again, really easy to do, and you'll probably notice a trend here, which is that with Ember, you don't need to type any code or write anything until you actually need to change from whatever the defaults are. In this case, we want to configure what model is backing the posts route. Really easy to do. As you can figure it out, if you figured it out by now, this all has to do with how these things are named. We're going to create a posts route. and we're going to extend the Ember route object. And here we're going to tell it there's a hook that we have called model. And this is simply a function, simply a method from which you return the model that you want to back that template. So I'm going to return all of the post models that our application knows about. I'm going to save that. Let's go back to the browser and refresh. And now you can see that the template is being backed by the collection of models. It's looping through all of them and printing some information about them. Okay, great. So we've got the list of posts. But what we'd really like to happen is that when you click on one of these, we'd like to display it over here on the left. So we don't want to remove these. We don't want to replace this. We want this list to stay on the left-hand side. But when you click on one, we want the contents of that post to appear on the right-hand side. Now we have something for doing this built right into Ember, and these are called nested routes. This is basically when you have multiple templates backed by different models on the screen at the same time. This is pretty difficult with a lot of different JavaScript frameworks. With Ember, we've built it right in, and it works well with the URL. In fact, you don't even have to think about the URL. It just works for free. So let's switch back to our application now. Now, let me show you how to define a nested route. We actually want this to be inside the post resource. So the second argument that we could pass here to define a nested route, we just pass it a function. And inside of here, we basically have the same syntax as in the router in general. And everything we declare inside here will be nested inside the post resource. In this case, we want post singular. We want to show a single post at the same time we're also showing a list of all of the posts. Now, we want to define in the URL something we call a dynamic segment. This is basically a placeholder in the URL where a unique identifier for that model can be placed. So here we're just going to say that the path is :post_ID. So it's basically going to replace in the URL this section with the ID of the post that it's found. So now that we have this nested route, let's go and define the template for the post route. And again, sounding like a broken record here, we just define a template called post, and that will be associated with the post route. Okay, so we want to display this, this blog post. Let's do an H1. We'll put the title. Below that, we'll put some attribution information. We'll say that it's by the author. Again, this is pulling from the same model objects as the template that we had defined up here. And then let's put the date that it was published. So we'll just put it in kind of smaller text here. Gray text, we'll say published at. And this is going to print the date in our template. And then let's put the above the fold text, intro. And then below that, we'll just put the remainder of the blog post. It's just called extended. This attribute on the model is called extended. Okay, and then we'll close that script tag. Now, we reload the page. Well, actually, clicking on this doesn't do anything because we haven't linked to it yet. We haven't told Ember that when you click on that link, you want to go to the post route. So this is real simple to do. Let's just replace this dummy link with, again, you guessed it, the link to helper. So we'll say link to the post route. Now, we're going to pass an argument here, so we can't just link to it because there's actually specific context. There's a specific model that when you click on it, you want to associate. There's a keyword in Handlebars called this, which basically means whatever the current model is. So we're going to say link to post this, and then we'll close that link to helper. Okay, so now we refresh the page. Click on the post. Now, when you hover over, you'll actually see down here at the bottom of the screen that it's generating the URLs and it's filling in the IDs for us right there. But when we click, nothing happens. Well, why not? Remember that when it's filling in, it's rendering that template, we have to tell it where we want it to go. In this case, we need to say, when you click on this link and you render that template, render it over here on the right-hand side. So again, if you remember how to do that, we'll just call outlet. And it will tell it, Ember, when you're rendering that template, put it right here inside of this div. Now, click on the link, refresh the page, click on the link, and look, there it is. We can click between these posts, and that template is being rendered right over here on the right-hand side. That's pretty cool, but there's some obvious improvements that we can make here. Probably the most obvious one, looking at this, this is a date for computers. This is not a date for human beings. So let's try to present that in a little bit more friendly way. I want to show you how to write a Handlebars helper that makes it really easy to format data that you have in your templates, and actually makes it really easy to integrate with existing JavaScript libraries. So in this case, I want to use the Moment.js library to take this gross JavaScript date and turn it into something that's a little bit more friendly for humans. So turn it into some relative dates. So let me switch back to my application here. This is super simple. I'm just going to drop down at the bottom, and I'm going to say Ember.handlebars.register bound helper. And I want to call the helper date. And this is going to take a single argument, which is in this case will be the date JavaScript object that we'd like to format. And the API for using Moment.js is simply to wrap that date by calling Moment. And then let's just use a relative date. So basically how long ago is from today, from right now. And we're just returning this value. And now let's just head over to our template. And everywhere we're using this date, which is just published at right here, we're going to put date. So again, this is putting date here, and it's going to call this handlebars helper that we defined called date. So put it here. Let's go into our application, refresh. Check that out. Isn't that cool? So this is now formatting it just a relative date from today, how long ago from today it was published. And you may have noticed that this API is called register bound helper. That means it will update automatically whenever the underlying model changes. So for example, I can go into the terminal here, into the console, and I can find the post that's being displayed. This is the post with the ID of 1. And I can set its publish date. Let me just change this date real quick. I'll create a new date object, so I'll set it to today. And you can see this updated automatically. I didn't need to do anything, didn't need to write any code, updates automatically. So you may notice one other thing to improve here, which is looking at the contents of these blog posts. You might notice this is actually Markdown. This isn't HTML. And we're here in the browser. We can render HTML. Boy, wouldn't it be nice if we could turn that Markdown into HTML to display to our users. Well, just like before, this is really easy to do. Instead of Moment.js, we're going to integrate with a JavaScript Markdown library called Showdown. Let me show you how to do that. It's very similar to what we just did. Again, we're going to say Ember.handlebars.register bound helper. This time the helper is going to be called Markdown. Just like before, it's going to take a single argument, which we're going to pass to it in our templates. Actually, the first thing we need to do is create this converter object. So I'm going to say var showdown equals new showdown.converter. This is just the Showdown API. So we're going to create this converter object. And then every time the helper gets invoked, we're going to say, actually, I should tell you first that the templates in Ember are secure by default. What that means is that any value that you try to print to the user, we're going to escape it. So people can't inject malicious HTML. You have to explicitly opt out of having your HTML escaped. In this case, because Markdown is emitting HTML, we want to return what we call a safe string. This is basically just a flag to the system to say, don't escape this. We want to display this as HTML. So the way that we do that is we just say return new ember.handlebars.safestring, and then we'll just pass the output that we want to put into the DOM. In this case, we want to convert the Markdown to HTML. The API for that is just showdown.makeHTML, and we'll pass the input. Okay, so now we've got our Markdown helper. Now let's just switch over to our handlebars templates. Everywhere we have Markdown, we're just going to put this Markdown helper. So here in the intro, and then again here in extended, Markdown, save, and refresh the page. And now you can see that we have this very nicely formatted HTML from the original Markdown. So far, our application has been completely read-only. Let's add a little bit of interactivity and allow the user to be able to edit these posts. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in an edit mode, so when you're reading a post, you can actually click an edit button and it will give you some UI to edit it, and also it's going to show a live preview right below. Let's go into the template first. Here, this is the post template. I'm going to put the editing UI right above, and there's a helper in Handlebars called the if helper that basically can conditionally show something. So I want to say, we're going to just make up a property here. This is called isEditing. So we're going to say if the user is editing, let's just put the placeholder right now. Let's say edit mode right here. And then we'll have a button that sends an event, sends an action. This will actually go to the controller, and we'll show you in just a second what that looks like. So basically, when you're in edit mode, it will show the editing UI. You can click done to save. Otherwise, if you're not in editing mode, it's going to show a button that allows you to get into it. So let's say button, action, edit. So it's going to send the edit action to the controller. And let's see what happens. So I'm going to go refresh the page. Okay, here's our edit button. But of course, nothing happens when I click edit. It's going to say, hey, there's nothing to handle the event edit. Well, now we know that we need a controller. And you guessed it, because we are editing the post template, we need the post controller. So let's go define that right now. Again, very easy to do. Switch over to our application. We'll say app.postController equals ember.objectController.extend. We're using an object controller here because it's representing the post controller represents a single model, not a collection of models. And we want it to respond to the edit event. So when it receives the edit event, we want to say this.set is editing true. Because the controller is going to be changing this is editing property, we're going to default that property to false. So we basically want to say, let's start off not in editing mode. So now when we come back here, when we click edit, you'll see that edit mode shows up. But when we click done, nothing's handling that event. So let's go implement it. So again, we'll just define this as a method on the controller. And this is very similar. We basically want to say the opposite of what we did before. This.set is editing false. So turn off editing mode. So now when we reload the page, we click edit, we go into edit mode, we click done, and we're out of editing mode. Now this isn't very useful. This edit mode doesn't do very much. So let's create the editing UI. Now I don't really want to make giant templates. I don't want to start cluttering up this whole template with all of the editing UI. So I'm actually going to create a separate UI that I can include in the parent. We call this a partial. So again, I defined this just like a standard template, but templates that are partials actually start with an underscore. So I'm going to call this post underscore edit. And that's basically just a convention to say this is a partial that's included by another template that's associated with a route. So in the interest of time, I'll just paste this in here. Basically what we're doing is creating a text field whose value is bound to the model title, and two text areas, one whose value is bound to the intro property of the model, and another text area whose value is bound to the extended property. Again, this is just the part of the blog post that shows up above the fold, and this is the extended blog post if you click to read the whole thing. Now, how do we include that partial? Well, that's easy to do. There's a helper, as you guessed, called partial. So here, we're just going to say partial post/edit to render the edit partial, and that's really it. Let's switch back to the application, refresh the page, and now when you click edit, you'll see that we have this editing UI up here. And how cool is this? As we edit, as we type, you can see that it actually live updates down below, including the Markdown. So as we edit it, you can see that it's live updating. And because we wrote a bound Handlebars helper, it actually updates automatically as we type. Okay, just a couple things to tie up some loose ends here. The first is when we go to the post list, before we've selected a post, there's nothing here, which is okay, but it's not great UI. So let's put in a little placeholder here that can tell the user what to do. Again, very easy to do. I'm just going to create, so we have our post template. There's also a convention in Ember, which is that if you don't have a nested route selected, in this case, if there's no nested post selected, we can call a template post/index, and that will be displayed. So I'm just going to put this placeholder here. This just shows some explanatory text saying, hey, please select a post. Now, when I refresh the page, you can see before I've selected a post, it shows this text here. When I click on it, it's replaced with the post. And lastly, when I come into the URL, into the web application, at the /URL, nothing's shown. Really what I'd like is to just have the list of posts show automatically. To do that, there's an index route that's created for us automatically. We're going to tell it that it should redirect to the post route when you come into the page and you haven't selected a specific route. So to do that, again, to configure a route, you just define it like this. In this case, it's called the index route. And there's a hook called redirect. And here we'll just transition to the route that we really want. In this case, this is the post. So now when we go back to the application, if we go in at / again, refresh the page, it redirects us automatically to the posts route. So this is quite a full-featured application. You can see that I've got different pages. I can switch between these pages. The URL updates as I do so. I've dynamically generated a list of all my models, and you can see that those URLs are being generated with the IDs included. So I can take this URL, I can tweet it, I can bookmark it, I can send it to my friends. They can see exactly what I'm seeing right now. And I get all of that for free. The only problem with the application right now, of course, is that, well, it's not really pulling any data from a server. It's just hard-coded. That's not really any fun. So let's go and make that happen. You can see I've actually got a server running on my computer. This is running on port 3000, and this is just a very conventional JSON API. There's nothing proprietary, nothing special going on here. It doesn't even matter what server technology is generating it. I'm not even going to tell you what I'm using. You'll have to guess. So running at localhost 3000, this is just a post endpoint, and it's just returning me an array of JSON objects that are being turned into my models for me automatically by Ember Data. So let's go in, and the first thing we're going to do is tell Ember, well, actually, the first thing we're going to do is delete this fixture data. So you can see there's nothing up my sleeve. Let me go ahead and delete this. Now I'll refresh the page. You'll see it's now saying, oh, can't find the fixture data for app.post. Okay, so let's keep us honest. Now let's tell it, okay, don't look for those records from the fixture adapter anymore. What we actually want to use is the REST adapter. And the only configuration we need to do here is to tell it which URL to hit. So because it's not running on the same port, we need to tell it it's a different server. We're going to say load this from localhost port 3000, and that's really it. Now, the one other thing we need to do, you notice so far we've been loading this from the file protocol. Because we're loading this across different origins, I actually do need to host this not on the file protocol so that I can do cross-origin requests. So let me fire up a little server here. I'm going to say localhost 9292/index.html. Here's our application, and look at that. It's actually loading these files from that JSON API. I didn't have to write any network loading code, which I think is very, very cool. Just to prove that it's doing what I'm saying, we can actually look here, and you'll see that it's making a network request and loading these files over the network. So that's pretty neat. Now, the one last thing I want to show you is we can actually edit these live. So let me click to edit. So remove these semicolons, or sorry, these exclamation points. A little too excited for my taste. So we'll click, done, save. Now what happens if we reload? You can see that our changes didn't get saved. Why not? Well, we never told it to save, so that's really easy to fix. Let me just switch back to our application here. And in our controller, when we send the done editing event, remember that happens when we click the done button here. We want to tell it to save any outstanding changes that may have happened to our models on the client. Really easy to do. We'll just get the store from the controller, and it has a method called commit. Let's call that, again, it just says save any pending changes to your REST API. So we'll reload the page. Let's try that edit again, see if it sticks this time. It's done. Okay, now we're gonna, it looks like something happened here. It sent a put to the server, refresh the page, and look at that. Our change actually has been saved. It's been persisted to the server. So you can see with not very much work, we've got a full-blown client-side web application for reading and editing models. So one of the nice things about JavaScript frameworks is that there's no install process, there's no dependencies to install, there's no generators to learn. You can just start writing code right away. It's also really fast. Even on a high latency connection, moving between the pages or editing models is really responsive even if you have a slow server. And finally, there's stuff that you can't even do if you're using a traditional web application server-side model. For example, live previewing the changes to Markdown as you type. Just not the kind of thing that would be feasible if you have to make requests back to the server all the time. So I hope you enjoyed learning how an Ember app gets built. If you'd like to learn more, or if you want to download the starter kit and have a go yourself, just visit Ember.js.com. Thanks.